This happened when I was 13. I'm a girl, and in the 8th grade, and the middle school I went to was about a 15-minute walk, so not very far. For context, my older brother and I grew up in East LA, in a small house that had a metal gate, and both the front and back doors had a black metal screen door and a wooden door. During the day, we would always leave the wooden door open and have the black metal door closed and locked, except for this day. That day I came home from school and had about an hour before anyone else would be home. I was really thirsty, so I rushed inside, grabbed the drink, and sat down on the kitchen table, which was about 10 feet away from the front door. I heard the metal gate open and was surprised, as no one should have been coming home that early. I got up to see who it was, and I saw an older man, probably in his 60s. He had short white hair and a long white beard. He was wearing an AC/DC t-shirt, torn jeans, and sunglasses. I remember thinking that he looked a lot like Santa Claus, but in a dirty and creepy way. He knocked on the metal screen door and asked if my parents were home. I was a dumb kid and said they weren't. He got a smile on his face and said that he collected donations for needy children. I said sorry, but I didn't have any money. He said sometimes children donated old toys. I said I didn't have any old toys to donate. He insisted that I must have some toys I didn't want anymore. He was beginning to creep me out, and I noticed that I hadn't locked the door when I came inside. I tried to keep my cool as I slowly and very carefully locked the door. I kept him talking so he wouldn't notice. A minute or two later, he wouldn't leave, so I decided I would pretend to check for toys, and then say I didn't have any so he would hopefully leave. I told him I would go check in as I turned and took a few steps down the hall. I clearly heard him yank at the door, trying to open it. I didn't want him to know I had heard, so I kept walking down the hall and into a room. I didn't have a cell phone, and the only phone in the house was in the kitchen. I thought about what to do and decided to stick with my plan. After about 2 or 3 minutes, I walked out hoping he had left. Nope, creepy Santa man was still there. I told him sorry, but I didn't find anything. He sighed and said alright, he would check another time. He left and walked across the street. I watched from the kitchen window, peeking through the blinds as he just stood there staring at my house for about 45 minutes. My brother and a few of his friends finally came walking down the street. As my brother came inside and his friends kept walking down the street, the man walked around the corner and disappeared. I told my brother what happened and he walked outside to look, but creepy Santa man was long gone. When my mom came home, we told her what happened and she called the police, but they said to call back if he showed up again. Thankfully, he never showed up. The events in this story actually messed with my head a bit, and it took me a while to come to terms with it. About 10 years ago, I studied abroad. I had a few friends in this new country, and I was glad to find a place to live with some pretty cool people my age. I started hanging with this crew, which became my friends, and we used to smoke a lot of weed. Things were cool. There was this one friend of my roommates, Frank, that came over to our place from time to time. I thought it was odd because he was like twice everybody's age. He was very intense as a person and made me feel kind of uncomfortable. The first time I met him, he seemed extremely suspicious of me and would ask me all kinds of weird questions, and it would suss me out. But he had a good sense of humor and would always crack great jokes. In a way, he was kind of charming, and my roommates seemed to love him. Also, he always brought pizza. I asked one of my friends what the deal was with this guy, and he was like, "Oh, you don't know? Last year, he found his wife and her brother's murder in their flat. He is under investigation, but he didn't do it." I was taken back by this. How could they really know he didn't do it, and why did they want to hang out with a potential psycho? I gave it the benefit of the doubt, but I certainly saw Frank in a new light now. Time went by, and Frank came by our place almost daily. He was very clever and sly, manipulative even. I got to know more about his background. He used to be in a gang when he was my age. He had been in prison most of the time in between then and now for violence. This did not help in me trusting him. I could not believe how naive my roommates were to trust this man. Then police went out and declared him a suspect. By now, this had become the biggest investigation ever in that particular area. He was interrogated but released for lack of evidence. Back at home, he would sit and talk about how he was a victim of a conspiracy, and all my friends would nod and believe him. I felt crazy for being the only one who didn't believe it. He must have sensed it because he took me outside and asked me if I believed him. I said yeah, sure I did. Because by now I was starting to get really afraid of him. I asked him about the murders, and he told me his version of the event where he, according to him, found the bodies. It was gruesome, but I still had doubts. And to my horror, he would at another time crack jokes about the whole thing. Who in their right mind would joke about that? In my mind, only a complete psychopath. I started researching what a psychopath actually is and learned that this guy fit every classical definition. I freaked out because I couldn't figure out what he really wanted from us. I started getting paranoid, and I also started believing that he actually planned on killing me and my roommates. I couldn't tell this to my roommates because they were fully blinded by this guy's charades and trusted him. At one point, I started sleeping with a knife in my bed. That's how scared I was that he was going to come and murder us like he murdered those poor souls. This was a horrible time for me. On top of that, police had been tipped off about the relatively large amount of weed being kept in the house and started raiding the place. 2 of my roommates were busted, and this marked the breakup of our collective. The day I moved out, Frank helped me with my stuff and looked at me menacingly, as I always found him. "You alright?" he said. "I actually planned on killing you, but you were okay." The others would laugh it off as a joke, but I saw it very differently. I was very glad to leave after hanging out with this murderer on and off for 1.5 years. Frank would be arrested shortly after, starting a huge trial that lasted several years. I found some new friends and found my way back home to some normality in my life. That's when I realized how screwed up the whole situation was. I had been isolated with all of this and had no one else to go to. A year later, I was back in my home country and followed the trial. All the craziness that surfaced about this man during the trial would convince me that I was probably right all along. He was properly mental and was convicted of 4 life sentences, so he will never be a free man again. I've seen a few threads on here about scary experiences from childhood, and this one has been sitting in my chest for like 13 years, so I figured I'd finally just write it out. This was 2011. I was 14 and my sister Priya was also 14. We are twins. We lived in a suburb outside of Tucson, Arizona in a pretty average neighborhood. Single-story house, decent sized, attached garage, backyard with a wall around it the way most houses out here have. Our parents had gone to work dinner thing for my dad and told us they'd be back by 11 or so. It was a Friday night in the summer, so we were just hanging out, with no school the next day, fully comfortable being home alone. We'd done it many times. We were in the living room playing Xbox 360. I think we were playing Black Ops, taking turns on zombies, just completely in our own world the way you are at that age when it's late and the house is yours, and nothing exists except the screen in front of you. All the lights in the living room were on. We weren't scared of anything, it was just a normal Friday. At some point, I want to say around midnight, Priya paused the game and said she was going to get a snack from the kitchen. I stayed on the couch and unpaused it and kept playing. The kitchen was just around the corner from the living room, not far at all, maybe 15 feet. I could hear her in there opening the pantry and moving stuff around. And then she came back and sat down next to me and we kept playing. But here's the thing, and I want you to understand that what I'm about to say still genuinely disturbs me when I think about it too hard. We played for probably another hour after that, maybe more. Just sitting there on the couch, controllers in hand, completely normal. At one point, I even went and got water. At one point, Priya changed the game. We were just doing what we always did. It was around 1:30 in the morning when my sister went to the bathroom down the hall. I was sitting there alone, waiting for her to come back, and I just happened to glance over to my left, toward the armchair in the corner of the room. There was a man sitting in it. I want to be really clear here that this armchair was maybe 8 feet from the couch we had been sitting on for the past 2 hours. It was in the same room. The lights were fully on, and there was a man sitting in it that I had never seen before in my life. He was probably in his 40s, kind of heavy set, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and jeans. His hands were folded in his lap. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the TV, like he was watching us play. His expression was completely blank. I could not move or speak for what felt like a really long time, but was probably about 4 seconds. Then I screamed my sister's name so loud, she came running out of the bathroom thinking something had happened to me. She came around the corner and stopped when she saw him. The man turned his head slowly and looked at both of us. Still that same blank expression. No surprise, no guilt. I grabbed my sister's arm and we ran to her bedroom at the back of the house and locked the door. And I called 911 from my phone. I was whispering because I didn't know if he was right outside the door, and the operator kept asking me to speak up, and I kept telling her there was a man in our living room and I didn't know who he was. She asked if he had threatened us or shown us a weapon, and I said no. She said officers were on the way and to stay in the locked room. I said okay. Priya was sitting on her bed with her knees pulled up, just staring at the door. We sat like that for about 10 minutes until we heard knocking at the front door and a voice saying it was the police. 2 officers had come in through the unlocked front door, which we found out later the man had just walked in through at some point while we were playing, and they found him still sitting in the armchair, still in the same position, hands folded in his lap. They said when they approached him and asked him to stand up, he looked at them like he genuinely didn't understand what was happening or where he was. He didn't resist at all. He was completely cooperative in this vacant, confused way. He told the officers his name and they ran it and found a file on him. I was never told the full details because I was only 14 and my parents had arrived by that point and everything was kind of chaotic. But what my dad told me later, after talking to one of the officers outside, was that the man had a documented history of dissociative episodes. That there were previous incidents where he'd been found in places he had no memory of going to. That during these episodes, he essentially wasn't fully present, wasn't aware of what he was doing or where he was, and had no recollection afterward of anything that happened. Which meant that the man had been sitting in our living room in that armchair 8 feet from the couch for somewhere between 1 and 2 hours while my sister and I sat right there playing Xbox 360 and had no idea. I thought about that so many times over the years. We were 14 and it was late, and we were just 2 kids in our own house, and there he was just sitting there in the dark corner of the room watching the screen. And at some point he must have settled in and just stayed, and we just never looked over. The part that really gets me though is when Priya went to the kitchen to get a snack. She would have walked right past that armchair. It's on the way to the kitchen. She was in there for a few minutes and came back and sat down, and neither of us said a word about it because neither of us saw him. He was that still for that long, just sitting there in our living room while we played Xbox like it was completely normal. I don't know whatever happened to him after that night. I hope he got help. I don't have any anger about it because from everything my dad told me, he wasn't in control of what he was doing. But that doesn't make the image of him sitting in that chair any less burned into my brain. Our parents put a chain lock on the front door the next day, the kind you have to manually slide across. We used it every single night for the rest of the time we lived in that house. Okay, so I've been going back and forth on posting this for a while. My friends who know what happened kept pushing me to write it up, so here it is, I guess. Fair warning, it's not like a huge dramatic thing, but it messed with my head pretty bad and still does, honestly. This was sophomore year. I was 19, living in one of the older dorms on campus in a single room, which I was really happy about after a bad freshman roommate situation. Just me, my own space, and a door I could lock. Felt like a win. I'm a pretty social person though. I know a lot of people. I'm in clubs and I'm always around. I say that because it matters. I'm not somebody who has trouble recognizing a familiar face. The first time was a Wednesday night around 11 o'clock. I was doing a long overdue laundry run in the basement laundry room, sitting on one of the plastic chairs, scrolling my phone, and a girl came in. I looked up and she kind of smiled. I smiled back and looked at my phone again. She loaded her machine and sat down a few chairs away, and we just existed in that quiet way strangers do when they are both doing something boring. When my dryer finished, I grabbed my stuff and left. The only thing I noticed, and I really didn't think anything of it at the time, was that when she first walked in, she looked at me for a beat too long. Like a fraction of a second more than you'd expect. That was it. The second time was about a week later at the library. I was on one of the upper quiet floors working at a table by the window. I got up to use the bathroom, and when I came back and glanced around, I saw her sitting a few tables away. She was already looking at me and looked down at her laptop the second I called it. I sat there trying to place her and landed on the laundry room but wasn't even sure. Could have been anyone. What I did notice was that her laptop screen looked dark the whole time I was up there, and she never wrote anything in the notebook sitting open in front of her. I packed up about 40 minutes later and left without looking over at the table. Something about it felt weird enough that I didn't want to know if she was watching me go. I told my friend Jess that night, and she said I was sleep deprived and it was a coincidence, so I let it go. But the third time I couldn't. There was a bonfire on the lawn by the East residence halls on a Friday. That was pretty crowded, and I was there with a group of friends. I turned around at some point to say something, and the girl was standing about 10 feet away on the edge of the crowd, all alone, looking directly at me. Not glancing around, not people watching. Looking at me specifically with this expression. I genuinely cannot describe it properly. It wasn't necessarily threatening, but it was more like recognition. The way you look at someone you knew really well, calm and totally focused. I grabbed my friend Bree and told her to look without being obvious. Bree looked and immediately asked if I knew her, and that was the whole problem. I did not know her, not even a little bit. I had never spoken to her in my life. I looked back and she was gone. I went home early that night. After the bonfire, I started actually going through my memory, trying to figure out if we ever crossed paths. Mutual friends, same class, anything. But nothing. I described her to people. Medium height, light brown hair, usually in a ponytail, round face, and around my age. But nobody knew who I was talking about. The fourth time was what made me go to campus security. I had a night class that let out at 9:45 in a building on the far end of campus. The walk back to my dorm took about 12 minutes through some pretty empty stretches. I'd been more aware since the bonfire, so I was paying attention. A few minutes into the walk, I got that feeling. I stopped like I was checking my phone and turned slightly. She was behind me, maybe 60 feet or so back, walking at the same exact pace I had been. She didn't stop when I stopped, though. She kept coming, and when she got close enough to see my face clearly, she looked up and smiled. Not a normal smile. Something slower, like she was happy about something. I turned and basically power walked the rest of the way to my dorm and didn't stop until I was through the keycard door. I went to campus security the next morning and laid out all of the 4 incidents. The woman I spoke to listened to everything and then said something that stuck with me. She said this kind of thing is more common than people think on college campuses. That when somebody keeps showing up like that, it usually means they've been watching from a distance long enough that they feel like they know you, even when it was never mutual. That landed on me pretty hard a few seconds after she said it. I stopped walking anywhere alone after dark for the rest of that semester. Had friends walk me to and from my night classes every week. I never saw the girl again after that night on the path. She was never identified either. Nothing ever escalated. I finished the year, moved off campus the following fall, and I still think about it more than I'd like to. Not in a panicked way anymore, more just in that unresolved way where something sits with you because you never got an answer. The laundry room was the first time I noticed her. It wasn't necessarily the first time she noticed me, and I have no idea how long before that it actually started. That part is what stays with me the most. This happened ages ago when I used to babysit. I was maybe 13, living in the countryside, and was babysitting most of the children on my street, 20 houses max. This particular neighborhood would love to go out on Wednesday because there was this Latin dance class going on in a nearby bar, so I was used to babysitting for her and knew she'd always come back very late. That specific night, the oldest of 3 was a little difficult and didn't want to go to sleep. I struggled with putting him to bed and afterward was tired. I studied my math a little and around midnight decided to take a nap until the kid's mom came back. A few minutes after falling asleep, I hear somebody frantically knocking on the door, trying to open it. It was the neighbor with her 2 young children. It was winter and we easily had 3 feet of snow, and the temperature outside must have been around negative 21 degrees Celsius, or about negative 5 degrees Fahrenheit. The kids only had their pajamas on and an unzipped jacket. She was wearing jeans, a wool shirt, and winter boots. I could see the fear in her eyes as I struggled to unlock the door. I panicked and had her walk all the way around the house to the patio door. When she got in, she quickly told me to bring all the children downstairs, turn off the lights, and not answer the door to anyone. The kids kept asking, "Who is Daddy going to kill?" And she kept muting them, saying nothing was going to happen, and then she left. I woke up all the kids, brought them all in the playroom in the basement, and asked them to play silently. The oldest, who hadn't been long asleep, was asking me what was going on, and I kept telling him it was a special occasion where he could play late with his neighbor friends. I calmed the other 2 kids, telling them no one was going to die, but in my mind, my time had come. I could see myself being shot while trying to protect the kids. I was trying to figure out how to stay alive, or at least how to keep them alive. I wasn't trying to be the hero, but I was trying to convince myself that if it came down to that, I would have to try and protect them. I called 911, but started shaking and crying so much I didn't know what to do. It was an answering machine asking if I wanted the cops, the ambulance, or the firefighters. I called my mom and told her quickly what was going on, and she called the cops and joined me. As she got in the driveway, the neighbor's husband was walking up the street with a huge axe. My mom got into the house, locked the door, and cracked open a window and asked what was going on while he was approaching the house. He asked her to come out and confront him, thinking it was his wife. My mother then explained to him that she was the babysitter's mother and came after getting a worried 13-year-old's call. He then asked us to give him his wife, but we didn't know where she was. He argued a little with my mom, but she was so calm that it calmed him down. I still admire her for that night. After 10 to 15 minutes of arguing, he walked back home carrying his axe, and a few seconds later, his wife knocked on the patio door behind the house and came in. She was crying and was apologizing to my mother for the whole situation. She thought her neighbor was home, not the babysitter. My mother asked me to check on the kids while she was taking care of the wife. A few minutes later, 2 police cars arrived and they came in and spent time with the wife, asking tons of questions, then me and my mother. In the meantime, the woman I was babysitting for arrived. They interviewed her too. They asked me and my mom if we were ready to go to court if the woman pressed charges against her husband. Surprisingly, she never did. Turns out she had just announced to her firefighter husband that she was sleeping with her boss in order to get a raise because they were struggling financially. He got his firefighting axe and said he was going to kill the bastard, but she wanted to stop him. That's why she brought the kids and left.